And here we're back with Larry Lynch from Environmental Health Assessing. And we were talking behind the cameras here, while the commercials are on air, about the importing products. How we can control or maybe have those products that are coming in regulation within the U.S. standards.
And I think that's what's being addressed now. And I think that's one of the challenges. The U.S. has its own set of standards with the USDA food code. And that clearly regulates food temperatures, hot holding temperatures, handling, sanitation. But it's not always accepted by the rest of the world. And so if something's manufactured perhaps in China or India, it's going to be manufactured against those standards. So the Global Food Safety Initiative that I was sharing with you a little bit earlier is trying to find a common element to that. There's another organization called the International Standards Organization, ISO. And in fact, you've probably heard of quality management, ISO 9000.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Well, they have for food safety one called ISO 22000. There's a wide variety of these standards.
Which do not include manufacturing, or?
They do include. Okay. And it's a much broader food safety standard. In fact, I was with a company up in Philadelphia just yesterday, and we were talking about the ISO 22000 standard. And that's, I think, the good news. Although, again, a bit of a dichotomy is I think American companies, particularly those that are doing global business, and that's almost all of them these days, are thinking about what is that global standard. And yes, we do adhere to the USDA standard here in the U.S., and perhaps in developing countries we apply the USDA standard because they don't have any. But is there a better global standard that bring these developing countries up to a level that everyone can operate that perhaps is even stricter than the USDA standard? And ISO 22000 is one of those that may very well address that. But you have to recognize that if we have this fragmented regulatory structure here in the U.S., you can only imagine that now we're going to try and bring in all these countries with their divergent political and personal interests together.
Will that happen in our lifetime, or?
No, I think it will. I was very impressed looking at the level of discussion when I attended this particular conference, and I think people recognize that if there's any one thing that we have to be focused on, we all have to eat. That's sustaining life.
That's the only business that doesn't suffer during this.
And if you're all about sustaining life, then in fact we have to pay attention to what we're doing here because it has an impact on everything else that we do. So I do believe that it's one of the ways. I was amazed at some of the countries that came together to talk, and we're talking about countries we read about in the news. There was Syria, Jordan, India, China, all represented very clearly at this conference. And so I do feel hopeful, presuming we live long enough, that we'll see it.
Hopefully. So taking all these concerns at our local level, what we can do, or what we have done to move toward that kind of excellence?
Well, I think the most important thing we continue to do at the local level is focus on training food inspectors, training food workers to understand the best habits and hold them accountable, for delivering safe food. And recognize that it's not just at the restaurant level. Their grocery stores, where you see your fresh produce, where you see your meats, also have to adhere to those USDA food standards for having a certified manager on the premises. So even when you're thinking about, my gosh, I'm walking through the grocery store here, that lettuce looks wonderful, I wonder where it came from. I happen to see that perhaps the asparagus came from Chile, or something else came from Peru, or the fruits came from Europe. And the fact of the matter is, there are strict standards the USDA has applied, and each of those, again, retail establishments have someone on the premises who is overseeing how that food is handled. The gap, I don't think, is there, Oz. I think that gap continues to close. It's that middle ground, and it's again, those developing countries where perhaps the sanitary habits are missing on the growing process. And quite frankly, that's what it comes down to. Probably the one biggest gap you have across the board are elements of sanitation.
Which you can control, because you can't control standard from other countries.
Well, you can't today, but I think that's the objective of this Global Food Safety Initiative, is to begin to do that. Not necessarily, I think it's a twofold piece. One part of it is, actually I wouldn't even say threefold. I think one part of it is creating regulations. Second part is education. The next part is administration. And so you create the standards, you educate against the standards, and then you apply them. And so it's looking at what is the potential for having a global organization that can apply the rules.
We'll be right back.